In the gilded silence of a palace corridor, where protocol is armor and duty is sacred, a royal guard's unwavering composure shattered in an instant. The crisp, impeccable line of his body folded as if struck, knees hitting the ancient stone floor with a sound that echoed like a gunshot. Before him, not a monarch or a threat, but a small, pale-faced prince whose trembling whisper held the power to unravel a family and bring a titan of a man to his knees. This is not a story of crowns and pageantry, but of the hidden fault lines beneath them, of a secret kept by a child, and the devastating moment a protector realized his greatest failure was already written in the frightened eyes of a little girl. The afternoon sun streamed through the tall windows of the Buckingham Palace corridor, painting long, warm rectangles on the polished floor. Sergeant James McAllister stood at his post, a statue in a scarlet tunic and bearskin hat. His eyes, fixed on a middle distance, saw everything and gave away nothing. This stretch of hallway, leading to the family's private apartments, was his domain. He knew every creak in the floorboard, every change in the light, every soft echo of distant laughter or conversation. For 12 years, he had guarded this family with a devotion that was both his profession and his identity. He had seen the children grow, had offered the ghost of a smile to a young Princess Charlotte's waves, and had maintained a steady, reassuring presence for Prince Louis during his more boisterous sprints down the hall. Today, the palace was quiet, wrapped in the soft, post-luncheon lull. James's mind, as always, was a checklist of security details and shifting patterns. His colleague, Thomas Wickham, was off duty. Thomas, a newer but fiercely ambitious guard, had been assigned to closer protection details lately, something James had advocated for, seeing a sharpness in him. As James stood sentinel, a small figure appeared at the far end of the corridor. Prince Louis, usually a burst of inexhaustible energy, was moving slowly, his shoulders hunched. He approached James, not with his usual mischievous grin, but with a hesitant, shuffling gait. "Sergeant McAllister?" Louis's voice was small, almost swallowed by the vastness of the hall. James broke protocol, just slightly, tilting his head down. "Your Royal Highness." "Everything all right?" Louis looked up, his blue eyes wide and troubled. He fiddled with the cuff of his shirt. I need to tell you something. It's about Charlotte." The name of his older sister hung in the air. James felt the first, faint tremor of unease. This was not a child's complaint about a toy. The prince's tone was laden with a secret too heavy for his small frame. "Of course, sir," James said, his voice low and calm, encouraging. "You can tell me anything." Louis took a shaky breath, his words tumbling out in a rushed, terrified whisper. "It was last week. In the garden, by the old swing. Thomas was with her. He said he was just playing, but he wasn't. He grabbed her arm really hard when she didn't want to go where he said. He told her it was a secret game, a test for being brave. He made her promise not to tell. He said," Louis's lower lip trembled. "He said if she told anyone, especially you, that Mummy would get very sad and go away." Charlotte cried after, but she didn't make a sound. "She's been having bad dreams." The world did not spin or go dark for James McAllister. Instead, it focused to a terrifying, laser-sharp point on the child's face. Every word was a shard of ice driven into his chest. The image flashed in his mind. Thomas's confident smile, Charlotte's unusually quiet demeanor the past few days, a faint, unexplained bruise on her wrist she'd hidden with a bracelet. He had seen it, asked, and she'd mumbled about a fall from her pony. He, a man trained to notice threats, had accepted a child's lie. The betrayal was a physical blow. Thomas, a man he had vouched for, a man entrusted with the most precious charges on earth, had used his position to frighten, to manipulate, to lay hands on a little girl in the shadow of a garden swing. A storm of emotions erupted within him. Volcanic rage at Thomas, a crushing, suffocating guilt that pressed the air from his lungs, and a protective fury so vast it threatened to eclipse his reason. His professional discipline, the iron casing around his being, cracked. The corridor, the palace, the very ground beneath his feet ceased to exist. There was only the horrific truth, spoken in a little boy's terrified voice, and the catastrophic failure of his own watch. His legs, solid pillars that had stood through parades and protests, simply gave way. The weight of it all, the broken trust, the fear in the children, his own blindness, drove him down. His knees hit the hard, cold stone with a solid, unforgiving thud that echoed in the silent hall. He was not bowing. He was collapsing. Before this small prince, This brave boy who had carried his sister's secret until he could bear it no longer, James McAllister, the unwavering guard, fell apart. He did not weep, but his broad shoulders sagged, his head bowed low, a silent monument to shattered duty. In that raw, unguarded moment, the man was laid bare, overwhelmed by the realization that the threat had been inside the walls, wearing the same uniform, and he had let it pass. The sound of his own knees hitting the floor seemed to reverberate in James's skull, a shameful drumbeat. He stayed there for a long moment, the cool stone a stark contrast to the fire burning in his veins. Prince Louis took a small step back, his eyes wide, perhaps frightened by the monumental reaction he had provoked. That small movement snapped James back into a fractured version of his professional self. The soldier in him, though wounded, reasserted control. He could not fall apart. Not yet. With a shuddering breath that felt like drawing glass into his lungs, James placed a fist on the floor and pushed himself up, rising slowly to his full height. He straightened his tunic, a gesture of pure instinct. His face, usually an impassive mask, was pale, the lines around his eyes etched deep with shock and anguish. He looked down at Louis, who was watching him with a mixture of fear and hope. "Your Royal Highness." James's voice was hoarse, gravelly with suppressed emotion, but deliberate. "Thank you. Thank you for being so brave. For telling me." He knelt again, but this time on one knee, bringing himself to the boy's level, an act of deference and urgency. "Where is Charlotte now?" "With her governess, in the schoolroom," Louis whispered. "And Thomas? Where is he supposed to be?" "He's off until tonight. He said he was going into the city." James's mind raced, mapping a course of action through the chaos. Protocol demanded he immediately contact the head of security, the equerry, a chain of command. But protocol had failed. This was beyond procedure. This was visceral. His first, his only, priority was Charlotte. He had to see her, to assess the truth not as a guard but as the protector he had promised to be. He needed to look in her eyes. "Louis," James said, his tone firm yet gentle, the one he used in minor crises. "I need you to be a soldier now. Can you do that?" The boy nodded, a flicker of resolve replacing his fear. "Go back to the schoolroom. Sit with Charlotte. Do not, under any circumstances, leave her side. Do not speak of this to anyone but me. If anyone asks, you are just doing lessons. Can you remember that?" "Yes, Sergeant." "Good lad. Now go." Quickly and quietly, Louis turned and scurried back down the corridor, his earlier slowness gone. James watched him until he disappeared around a corner. Then he moved. His walk was not the usual measured patrol. It was a swift, silent stride, a predator's gait. He bypassed the communication panel at his post. He needed eyes on the child before the machinery of the palace investigation whirred to life, which would bring questions, strangers, and perhaps a chance for Thomas to fabricate a story if he caught wind. He reached the schoolroom door, pausing to compose himself. He could not let his fury show. He knocked and entered at the call. The governess looked up, surprised to see him. Princess Charlotte was at a table, a book open before her, but she wasn't reading. She was staring out the window, her expression distant, a hollow look in her usually bright eyes. "Apologies for the interruption," James said, his voice forcibly neutral. "A minor security check for this wing. I'll just be a moment." The governess nodded, accustomed to the discreet rhythms of security. James walked around the room, pretending to check the window locks. His heart hammered against his ribs. He stopped near Charlotte's table. "Good afternoon, Your Royal Highness," he said softly. She turned her gaze to him, and the smile she offered was a weak, practiced thing that didn't reach her eyes. It was the smile that broke what was left of his heart. He saw it now, the shadows under her eyes, the way she held herself slightly closed, the absence of her spark. "Hello, Sergeant McAllister," she said, her voice polite but flat. His eyes, trained to observe, dropped to her wrist. The bracelet was there, a thin gold chain. He made a show of adjusting his cufflink, his movement bringing him closer. "I hope you're enjoying the book," he murmured, just for her. In that moment, he let the professional mask slip, just a fraction, allowing the genuine concern he always felt for her to show in his eyes. He didn't ask about the garden. He didn't mention Thomas. He simply held her gaze and offered a tiny, almost imperceptible nod, a message of solidarity, of "I am here." A flicker of confusion, then a glimmer of understanding, and finally, a wave of relief so profound it made her eyes shimmer with unshed tears before she quickly looked down at her book. That was all the confirmation he needed. The truth of Louis's words was etched in her silent relief. All secure, James announced to the governess, his tone crisp again. He gave a short bow and left the room. The moment the door shut behind him, the calm evaporated. The protective fury returned, colder and more focused now. He strode to a secure phone, not his regular line, but a direct number to the one man he trusted absolutely. Major General Sir Richard Hayes, the retired former head of Royal Protection, his own mentor, a man who lived outside the palace bubble but understood its deepest secrets. The phone rang twice. Hayes. Sir. It's McAllister. Code Black. The children. Inside threat. Wickham. He used the old, informal code they devised years ago for unthinkable scenarios. There was a beat of stunned silence on the line. Evidence. Eyewitness account from Prince Louis. Corroborated by visual on Princess Charlotte. Psychological markers clear. Threat made to ensure her silence using emotional coercion. Another pause, shorter this time. Hayes's voice, when it came, was like steel. I'm on my way. Do not alert the regular Ching. Isolate and contain. I will handle the palace. You have authority to act. Use it. Understood. James hung up. The authority to act was a blank check from a man whose word was law in certain circles. It meant the rules were suspended. He now had a single mission. Ensure Thomas Wickham never got within a mile of the palace or the family again. He headed for the security office to access duty rosters and tracking data, his mind already weaving a trap, his heart a cold, hard stone in his chest. The time for kneeling was over. Now, it was time to hunt. The security office was a hive of muted activity, screens glowing with camera feeds and data streams. James entered, his presence causing a slight shift in the room's atmosphere. He was known for his quiet authority. He nodded to the two officers on duty and moved directly to the terminal that logged off-duty movements and access codes. Sergeant, one of the officers, a young man named Peters, inquired. Routine cross-check on Wickham's patrol logs from last week, James said, his voice devoid of any emotion. The Major General requested an audit. Seems there's a discrepancy in the perimeter reports he filed. It was a plausible lie, delivered with the weight of his rank. Peters simply nodded and returned to his work. James's fingers flew over the keyboard. He pulled up Thomas's file, his schedule, his access card swipes. The data told a sanitized story, logged off duty at 1,300 hours, no palace access until his shift that evening. But James was looking for ghosts in the machine. He cross-referenced the garden camera feeds from the date Louis had mentioned. The camera covering the old swing area had, according to the maintenance log, been undergoing a scheduled calibration from 1,400 to 1,600 hours, a 2-hour blind spot. The work order was digitally signed by a technician James didn't recognize. He traced the ID. It was valid, but the technician was listed as on leave that week. A cold fury settled in James's stomach. Thomas had planned it. He had used his knowledge of the security systems to create a window to erase digital eyes. He then pulled up Thomas's personal vehicle log. His car had left the palace grounds at 13:20. But James didn't stop there. He accessed the city's ENPR camera network, a privilege of his clearance, tracking the car's number plate. It showed a route to a residential area in Kensington, then a parking garage. The car had not moved since. Thomas was likely at his flat. James printed the relevant logs and maps, his movements efficient and silent. As he worked, his mind replayed the hollow look in Charlotte's eyes. It fueled a resolve that was absolute. This would not be a palace scandal, hushed up and handled with discreet transfers. This man was a predator in uniform, and James would see him broken by the very system he had betrayed. Sir Richard Hayes arrived within 40 minutes, his demeanor that of a visiting dignitary, which technically he was. He drew James into a secure anteroom. James laid out the digital evidence, the doctored work order, the camera blackout, the ANPR trail. He then, his voice thick but clear, repeated Prince Louis's account verbatim and described his observation of Charlotte. Hayes listened, his face granite. The prince's testimony is definitive, he said finally. A child of that age, in that position, is not fabricating such a specific, emotionally charged account. Coupled with the security breach, he let out a long, slow breath. The family has been informed. They are devastated and furious. Their instruction is clear. Wickham is to be removed from the premises, from the service, and from any position of trust permanently. Legal consequences will be pursued to the fullest extent, but quietly. Your task is the extraction. I will handle the palace press office and the internal review. He does not come back here. Do you understand? Perfectly, sir. Take Peters with you. I've briefed him. He's clean and loyal. Use an unmarked car. Bring him to the barracks, not back here. The interrogation suite is ready. James found Peters, who now looked at him with a new, grim understanding. No words were exchanged. They collected sidearms, a formality, but a necessary one, and headed for the garage. The car was a nondescript sedan. James drove, his hands steady on the wheel, his eyes fixed on the London streets flowing past. The postcard beauty of the city felt like a mockery. Every landmark they passed was a place these children should be able to enjoy without fear, especially from those sworn to guard them. They reached the modern apartment building in Kensington. James and Peters, out of uniform and plain clothes, moved with synchronized purpose. They took the elevator to the 4th floor. At the door of flat 42, James knocked, a firm, official rap. Silence. Then, footsteps. The door opened, and Thomas Wickham stood there, dressed in casual trousers and a shirt, a look of pleasant surprise on his face that quickly faltered when he saw their expressions. James? Peters? What's all this? Thomas Wickham, James said, his voice low and devoid of any former camaraderie. You are to come with us immediately for questioning regarding a serious breach of protocol and conduct. Thomas's eyes narrowed, a flash of arrogance and calculation in them. Questioning? On my off-duty? This is highly irregular. I'll need to call my superior. Your superiors sent us, James replied, not moving an inch. This isn't a request. Come quietly. For a second, Thomas seemed to consider resistance. He glanced past them, but Peters had already shifted his stance, blocking any view of an exit. The arrogance melted into a dawning, sick realization. The facade cracked. He knew. The color drained from his face. He had not expected the reckoning to come so fast, or to be delivered by James McAllister himself. I don't know what this is about, Thomas blustered, but the confidence was gone, replaced by a thin veneer of defiance. The garden, Thomas, James said, the two words dropping like stones. The swing. The secret game. Princess Charlotte's wrist. All pretense vanished. Thomas's shoulders slumped. He looked from James's icy stare to Peters's stony face. The game was up. He gave a slow, defeated nod. Let me get my jacket. He turned, and James followed him into the flat, his eyes scanning the room, ensuring no foolish last act. Thomas picked up a jacket from a chair, his movements sluggish. As he shrugged it on, he muttered, almost to himself, It wasn't how it sounds. James didn't answer. He simply took his arm, not roughly but with an unbreakable firmness, and guided him out of the flat, down the elevator, and into the waiting car. Thomas sat in the back, Peters beside him, staring blankly out the window as James drove towards the military barracks on the city's outskirts, a place designed for dealing with secrets and betrayals far from the public eye. The trap had been set, and it had closed silently. The real confrontation, however, was just beginning. The barracks interrogation room was stark, lit by a single fluorescent bar, smelling of stale coffee and industrial cleaner. Thomas Wickham sat on one side of a bare metal table, having shed his jacket. He'd regained a sliver of composure on the ride over, the shock giving way to a sullen, defensive posture. James McAllister sat opposite him, having removed his own outer layer. Peters stood by the door, a silent witness. For a long minute, James just looked at him. He saw the handsome, confident man he'd once considered a promising colleague. Now he saw only the cunning in his eyes, the weakness in the set of his jaw. The recording equipment was on, a small red light glowing. State your name and rank for the record, James began, his voice flat. You know who I am, James. For the record. Thomas sighed, a theatrical show of exasperation. Sergeant Thomas Wickham, Royal Guards Regiment. You are here to account for your actions on the afternoon of Tuesday the 14th, between approximately 14:30 and 1530 hours, in the private gardens of Buckingham Palace. Specifically, your interaction with Her Royal Highness Princess Charlotte. Thomas leaned back, crossing his arms. I was on duty in that sector. Princess Charlotte was at the swings. She seemed distressed about a minor argument with her brother. I offered comfort. I may have taken her arm to steady her. Children exaggerate. Prince Louis has a vivid imagination. James didn't flinch. He opened a folder and slid a printed still from a distant camera, one that showed the edge of the garden, the blurry figures of a man in uniform, and a small girl near the swing area, before the targeted camera went offline. The timestamp was clear. This is you. The scheduled calibration of the primary camera was authorized under a forged work order linked to your security login. Thomas's eyes flickered. A system error. Not my doing. The technician whose ID was used was on leave in Scotland. His credentials were accessed from the Palace network at a terminal assigned to your patrol route that morning. James placed another log sheet on the table. And then there is the testimony. The testimony of a 4-year-old boy. Thomas scoffed, a desperate bravado creeping in. It's hearsay. Fantasy. James leaned forward, his voice dropping to a deadly quiet. He described the grip. He described your words. The secret game. The threat about their mother. He described the look on his sister's face after. He carried that secret, Thomas. He carried it until the fear for her outweighed the fear you instilled. That is not fantasy. That is the burden you placed on a child. For the first time, a crack appeared in Thomas's armor. A muscle in his jaw twitched. He looked away, towards the blank wall. Why? James asked, the single word loaded with a need to understand the incomprehensible. Was it power? Was it some sick fascination? She is a child. You were there to protect her. Thomas remained silent for so long James thought he wouldn't answer. Then, he spoke, his voice low, directed at the table. It wasn't about that. It was about access. Proximity. She's the favorite, everyone knows it. Getting her to trust me, to see me as a friend, it was a stepping stone. A way to be indispensable. The firmer hand, the secret, it was just to ensure she listened, that she depended on me. It got out of hand. She started to pull away, to look scared. I had to reinforce it. James listened, his disgust deepening. It was even more pathetic and calculating than he'd imagined. Not a crime of violent passion, but one of cold, careerist manipulation, using a child's emotional vulnerability as a rung on a ladder. The bruise, the fear, were just collateral damage in Thomas's quest for status. You terrified a little girl to advance your career, James stated, the words final and damning. I never meant to hurt her. Thomas snapped, his eyes flashing up, finally, showing genuine emotion, panic. It was just discipline. You're making it sound monstrous. What does the fear in a child's eyes look like to you, if not monstrous? James's question hung in the air. He stood up, the chair scraping loudly. He had heard enough. The confession was there, wrapped in self-justification, but it was a confession nonetheless. Your career is over. You will be discharged. Criminal charges of assault and intimidation of a minor will be filed. The palace will see to it that you never work in security, in any position of trust, ever again. The uniform you disgraced will be taken from you. The finality in James's tone broke the last of Thomas's resistance. The arrogance fully crumbled, replaced by the pale, sweating visage of a man who had gambled everything and lost spectacularly. James, Sergeant McAllister, please. There has to be another way. A transfer. A quiet resignation. Think of the scandal. There is no scandal, James interrupted, his voice like iron. There is only your crime and its consequences. The family's wish is for justice, not secrecy. You will face the law. He nodded to Peters, who stepped forward. As Peters formally placed Thomas under restraint for the transfer to civil authorities, James walked out of the room. He didn't look back. The cloying air of the interrogation room was replaced by the cool, dim hallway. He felt no triumph, only a hollow, weary cleanup. The poison was identified and extracted. But the wound it left, on a little girl, on her brother, on the very heart of the trust he was paid to uphold, was deep and raw. His job here was done, but his duty, he knew, had only just entered a new, more difficult phase, the long road of helping those children feel safe again. Document 5. The official processes moved with a quiet, ruthless efficiency that only institutions like the palace and the army can muster when truly motivated. Thomas Wickham was charged, remanded, and his case began its journey through the courts, shielded from the public eye by layers of legal procedure and privilege. The story never reached the newspapers. A personal matter and a medical discharge were the only whispers that escaped the walls. For James McAllister, the aftermath was a more personal, more complicated terrain. The physical threat was neutralized, but the psychological fallout remained. A fine dust settled over the private quarters. He requested, and was granted, a temporary reassignment to the children's personal security detail, a closer, more intimate role. It was both a penance and a necessity. He could not yet trust their safety to anyone else, and he needed to rebuild what was broken. The first few days were stiff. Princess Charlotte was polite but distant, retreating into books or quiet play. Prince Louis was unusually subdued, perhaps worried he had caused trouble. James didn't force the issue. He was simply there, a constant, calm presence. He adjusted his posture, making himself less of an imposing statue and more of a watchful sentinel. He started small. One afternoon, as Charlotte drew in the sunroom, he remarked quietly on the color of the sky in her picture. She glanced up, surprised he'd noticed. Another day, when Louis struggled to tie his shoelace before a walk, James knelt and said, "A tricky knot. Here, let me show you the soldier's way." He taught him a simple, effective method, their heads bent together. It was a lesson in knots, but also in trust. The turning point came a week later. They were in the garden, the same garden, but James had subtly redirected their play away from the old swing, which had been quietly removed. A sudden summer shower sent them scrambling for the cover of a gazebo. James ushered them in, laughing gently at their squeals. Safe under the wooden roof, they watched the rain drum on the path. Charlotte, standing close to him, her earlier tension easing in the fun of the dash, looked up at the pouring sky and then, hesitantly, at James. Her small hand crept out and touched the back of his large, scarred hand where it rested on a pillar. She didn't say anything. She just left it there, a light, warm pressure. James didn't move. He didn't look down. He kept watching the rain, feeling the weight of that tiny hand, a weight more profound than any metal. It was an absolution, a silent communication. "I am not afraid of you. I am safe with you." Louis, ever observant, saw it. He sidled up to James's other side and leaned against him, a companionable sigh escaping him. "It's coming down hard." "That it is, sir," James said, his voice soft. They stood there, the three of them, watching the rain wash the garden clean. In that quiet, sheltered moment, the last of the invisible walls crumbled. The horror of what Thomas had done was not forgotten, but it was being overwritten by new, safer memories. James was no longer just the guard who had failed. He was the guard who had listened, who had acted, who was here now in the rain. Later that evening, after the children were settled, James was summoned to the private sitting room. The prince and princess were there. Their gratitude was quiet, but profound. They spoke of their confidence in him, of the difficult road ahead for Charlotte, of their appreciation for his sensitivity. "You have our complete trust, Sergeant McAllister," the prince said, his hand resting on his wife's shoulder. "More now than ever." James bowed his head. "It is the honor of my life, Your Royal Highness." As he walked back to his post that night, the palace felt different. The corridors were no longer just a beat to be patrolled. They were a home he had helped make safe again. The stone floor where he had fallen to his knees was just a patch of stone. The failure of that moment had been the catalyst, not the definition. His duty had evolved from a simple protection of the body to a more sacred guardianship of the spirit. He stood once more at his post, back straight, eyes watchful. But, inside, the soldier had been tempered by fire. He was a protector, truly tested, and he had not been found wanting. The silence around him was no longer gilded and brittle, but peaceful, earned, and deeply, profoundly guarded.